or if you are in that family planning or picking a place to work, because, oh my goodness, that's a big conversation these days, is right. I mean, everybody and their brother is offering these shiny little packages, but like what things to look for when you're prioritizing family, but you also want to work in a good practice. What are things like that you should be looking at?
I will say my number one thing that's come up when I talk to people about this topic, which is a lot, is hold out for the right thing. You have a little bit more time than you think. You don't want to rush into the wrong thing. The second thing I will say is that the world has actually changed a lot. It has only been 8 years, but it's a completely different environment than it was 8 years ago. Bigger corporate practices have really great benefit packages. And because they have entire HR departments and because they've really standardized things, there's a very straightforward way that things are supposed to work. And there's like a very clear hierarchy and you know who you're supposed to talk to. There are absolutely exceptions to that. And I hear all of the disaster stories that occur. But for the most part, the corporate practices have a very clear set of things in place. A lot of them do require you to purchase separate short-term disability if you want pay during the time that you're on maternity leave. Otherwise, it's unpaid leave. Now, in smaller practices, which is where I was for my second and third pregnancies, it's a whole different ballgame. Every single one is different, and you need to be really clear on what that particular practice will and will not do. And for me, there's rules about what theoretically that people are allowed to ask you in an interview. They're not allowed to ask about your reproductive status or your childbearing plans. Like they're not allowed to ask that. So I brought it up because I said, this is a major determining factor for how I feel about a job. So we're going to talk about it. Because it's not just an interview where you're trying to get someone to hire you. You are interviewing them to see if this is going to be what you need and want. So treat it like that. I just put my cards on the table and I would say, I have an 8-month-old. He is a priority to me. He is probably not going to be my only child. Let's talk about how leaves work. Let's talk about how paid and unpaid absences work. Let's talk about having to cancel things at the last minute in case I have a sick kid. Like, let's talk about this. And it's amazing once you open the door, like how many different models are out there. People have really thought about this. I've interviewed at practices that have literally like added on whole separate parts to the hospital so they can have an ensuite nursery. I've interviewed at places that have just allowed you to bring the baby to work. As long as you work out a way for the child to be cared for where you can also do your job, it's okay to bring your baby. I have interviewed at places that are super flexible with your time so that you can do school drop off, come in, work until school pick up, and then that's it. That's your whole day. I have interviewed at practices where they have very generous combination vacation flex hours so that whether you are taking sick time for a kid or to go care for a parent, because that's something else that happens when you get older is your parents get older, or whether you actually are on vacation, it's all together and you can use it the way you need to use it. There's pros and cons to that. But for young parents, that's often really helpful. So you just have to ask all the questions. So you have insurance, and insurance, after you've reached your deductible, which is a big deal, after you've reached your deductible, they're going to pay for like labor and delivery and pregnancy stuff. Occasionally, you can use your HSA if you have a high deductible plan to pay for things like doulas. I did that on my third pregnancy. That was pretty cool. Depending on what state you're in, your insurance may or may not pay for a home birth midwife, but it's almost always going to be an out-of-network expense. So you are going to pay more for that on most insurance plans. For the most part, at least in the states I've lived in, if you have birth centers near you, there's the cost for the birth center and the cost for the hospital for a straightforward vaginal birth are the same. And they do that on purpose because they don't want to compete with the local hospital. So they just price themselves to be the same. Knowing these things in advance really is really helpful. Your insurance, that part of your insurance is not going to pay for your time off. So you use your vacation time. Almost all employers are going to require you to use all of your vacation time first. It sucks completely because that means that on like the hardest 2 years of your life, when you are pregnant and then you have a newborn, you don't get a vacation at all because you've used all of your vacation during your maternity leave, which is not a vacation. So just to be aware of that, you don't get a vacation the year you're pregnant or the year after you're pregnant when you have a baby, just pretty much universal. So you use all of your vacation time for your maternity leave. And then whatever more you want after that, 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, is unpaid unless you either have an employer who specifically has maternity leave benefits. And there are some states that do, and there are some individual employers that do. Or if you have intentionally pre-purchased short-term disability insurance. And short-term disability insurance and paid time off and maternity leave usually don't pay all of your expenses during that time. They pay like 60 or 70%, depending on the details. So all of these things are kind of things to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out your finances during that time. I will say that for all three of mine, I did not take as much time off as I really wanted to because I could not make the finances work, even with short-term disability in place. So I did different things with each pregnancy, depending on what I could figure out, but none of them did I take really as much time as I wanted. So when people ask me how much time should I take, which is possibly one of the most common questions I get, I'm like, look, how much time I think you should take is basically irrelevant. How much time can you afford to take? Take that, all of it. Don't short yourself. And if that's only 4 weeks, have grace with yourself. And I can give you some other advice. If that's 8 weeks, less than ideal, but you'll probably be okay. If it's 12 weeks or beyond, understand that you are in less than 1% of the population that gets to have more than 12 weeks in the US anyway. It's not like that in other countries, but in the US. And so I'm so happy for you. It is still not enough time, but I am so happy that you get that. So yeah, that covers a couple of the common questions I get.
Yeah.
Want more from Vet Life Reimagined? Yes, please. Well, check out the main page of Vet Life Reimagined or click on the next video.